I'll kick it off with Dan's question. What do we want to do for the Connectathon? Do we want to track? I think it's pretty much a yes or no question for the group. Dan offered to help set up that track if we do one.
I think we want track, yes, and then like similar to what we did, writing tests and passing tests.
Yeah, and I think it'll be personally, I think it's just it's a sort of a marketing event as well. People look at the tracks and are interested in it, so that might be a way we can expand the group membership and things like that. So I'm for it, and that's a consensus. Dan, are you still good to start setting that up?
Yeah, I can create the page. I guess a question for the group here. So it's a virtual Connectathon that's in the middle of the week. Are people able to attend and participate? Because I think if we don't have a critical mass, it may not be worth it. Although I like Nikolai's idea of working on some tests.
Yeah, this can be one of the hardest times just because there's so many tracks at once. I would say, given that it's virtual, we might try to run a scheduling poll and pick our own time that sort of works the best for this group rather than trying to align it with the event itself.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I don't know what the sort of official requirements are around it. Is it just pretty free form to sort of, get together during that day or days? I've actually not attended one, the virtual one.
Yeah, I mean, for us, there's no official requirements at all. We're working outside of an HL7 work group, and we can use that as a convening function if it's helpful, or we can create our own convening function.
We're the renegades apparently here, but I'm good with that. I could set up a scheduling poll to set things up for folks. Would we want, would we want like a whole day? I'm just thinking because I'm in Eastern time, generally like block out the whole day, maybe have like different sessions during the day, something like that, maybe a couple hour blocks. What do you guys think?
Yeah, because it's virtual, yeah, I have an idea. So probably we can use Connectathon as a place to report the progress and try work hard before Connectathon, and then only having like a couple hour session to answer the question from other people and showing what we have. Because I agree that there's what is the difference between virtual Connectathon and what we're doing now? Yes, so it could be like good milestone to do some reporting, like building all these pages, like presenting the spec, presenting like, I don't know, what we want, like interactive page and implementation tests, all this stuff.
So maybe we could structure it a little bit like we structured, I think the last Connectathon, where sort of the early session was sort of a show and tell kind of demonstration session, maybe on some of the work we did. And then, we had some blocks in there to work on tests, sort of heads down, and the end, sort of a wrap up session, sort of three types of sessions. Like, is it one day, Dan, or is it multiple days?
I think it's 2 days.
16th through 18th.
Yeah.
So 3 days.
Well, I don't know if there's just a kickoff on the 16th. So look.
Let's double check that. But how does that just general structure sound for folks? Sort of kind of a show and tell at the beginning, working session, and then maybe a wrap up session. That's also a little bit of a show and tell. Yeah.
Maybe let's discuss in chat if there is no kind of obvious solution. Yes. So
okay.
Yeah, at least have one meeting during the Connectathon time would be nice. Like.
Yeah, we can also have a working group meeting, style thing too as well. So I think the consensus is let's do it. And I can help out with some logistics stuff too here, so we can work together on that. Second agenda item was that discussion around recursion and recursively defined data. I was just reading over that thread, and I believe the conclusion was that we don't need a specific kind of structure statement around recursion. It might be nice, but nice to have, but it's not technically necessary. Is that the conclusion that others got from that?
I don't know if we reached a conclusion. I did try to show that you could express this kind of concept with some of the tools we already have, but I don't know if that means we should.
Well, we still need to add this repeat thing to the set of functions we support. Is that right?
Do we have union now in this list, like union operator?
No, and I don't think we would want to add it generally either, because it introduces all sorts of complications in a wider context. And even if you don't have a general, like it's kind of yuck, processing that union and then figuring out what it exactly means that Josh did. So I came to the conclusion that it would be better either to go stick with what we originally, well, one of the options we talked about, which was having a specific structure for that, or else going with Josh's other option, which is souping up the repeat function as an advanced change for what FHIR would do in the definition to allow you to say FHIR so repeat 0, but it's kind of tricky inside FHIR because it needs to redefine how repeat's defined in order to do that.
I will say that the question of whether we allow the word union or the pipe operator in our FHIR subset, I know we've avoided it, but now that I've started on SQL generation, supporting union is one of the more straightforward things that you can do. It wouldn't obviate the need for our own union all keyword, because our keyword allows you to do different things on the different branches, and that's very important. But I don't see that including union in our FHIR expressions would be prohibitive.
Like you could put union in the base, but union in the core, like I'm just thinking aloud, where else could you put a union in the FHIR statement that would cause trouble? Like you allow a where function, would you allow a union in the where function?
I think so. If we were going to add it, I mean, at least the SQL generation I've been doing is recursive in that sense. Like it treats the inside of a where clause with the same CTE generation as outside.
Yeah, I think that the only constraint that we would have from our SQL generation that we've done so far in this is that we would want the elements of the union to be of the same type, because like since we're generating SQL, like having a list of different types is challenging. So if we had a union, if we could constrain the union support to being of the same type, then I think that's entirely doable from an SQL perspective.
Oh, so I was just going to ask, is union really what you want? Or is it more like the semantics of combine? Because union actually requires you to implement all the equality semantics, because it says that it eliminates duplicate values.
Yeah, I think you're right that we should be talking about combine, at least for this use case. But oftentimes I think people write a pipe because it's a prettier syntax without thinking a lot about which operation it corresponds to. I'm guilty of that, at least.
Yeah, we definitely need some SQL implementation to measure the complexity. Because I know that, John, you are doing some tricks, like, so you're partially implementing FHIR in Java, yeah? So that then Postgres do the same trick with the JSON pass. So I think the most hard implementation is going to be by a big query. I don't know, Ryan, have you tried to do recursive stuff?
Yeah, I mean, our code is pretty well. I mean, recursive with some constraints. I mean, so it's like having like an unknown arbitrary deep item is just pretty much fundamentally in conflict with like how the data is represented and the BigQuery structure if you don't know how deep it is up front. But having like wheres that have nested wheres that have other things that's totally fine. I mean, our code generation logic is recursive. It just recurses to a certain depth and then generates SQL. So I think that's having a known depth is the sort of the key or at least a limited depth is the key there. But otherwise, it's like the SQL looks complicated, but like each individual level of recursion is not especially complicated by itself. It's just the same logic, just nested.
What are possible sort of next steps or avenues to move forward? I think Nikolai suggested, continuing working on the SQL implementations, and Josh, what is the, where is that implementation at for the union pipe operator that in your implementation?
Well, I haven't touched it. I've just been trying to get to the point where I have a framework that can kind of handle basic structures and then look at adding functions one by one. So I'm at the stage where I would love feedback on the small amount that I am trying to handle now, just to make sure I'm not going off in some crazy direction.
So I think that could be a potential next step. And I know you're sharing that code around as well. So I don't know if anybody's had a chance to take a look at that yet, but maybe that's the next step, to sort of get a checkpoint on where you're at now.
Maybe we should try to implement it, because it's hard. It's hard now without trying to implement the recursive stuff to say what will work and what will not. Like we can say, okay, we allow like pipe operator and repeat, but then we will stuck with the SQL generation or stuff like this. So because that's what I'm still a little bit scared, because FHIR pass, if we introduce like pipe operator, repeat, so then people will start combining all this stuff together, and I'm pretty not sure that we will be able to handle this in some sophisticated scenarios. Yeah.
Right. So I think I would say review of what Josh's code does currently, and then I don't know, Nikolai, if you're moving forward with some of your implementations on Postgres too, like what's the status of those?
Yeah, I would say that for Postgres it's not big issue, because we have a JSON pass which supports kind of recursive operations. So we can support like even FHIR pass repeat stuff. It is not a problem. So, but I'm a little bit scared what the limitation of other SQL implementations, yes, which are not having such a expressive JSON pass stuff like Postgres has. Yeah,
right.
Let's say even DuckDB or other like BigQuery, Spark.
Do you really need to use the union operator in this query, or could you use our other union clause that we've come up with?
I think they're interchangeable. Yeah.
So in this case, I just want to think about what that would look like. You could write two branches with the same handler. You'd sort of have to copy and paste it between the two. But if you did that, that'd be fine. It's just, it feels like unnecessary repetition.
Right. Yeah, I'm just thinking about what the next steps here could be.
Try to implement and then discuss, because when we will try, we will have a lot of feedback about it.
I don't want to just put that on Josh.
No, it's not on me. I mean, I'll get to it maybe eventually, but I certainly can't be the only one to try it anyway. So don't put it on me. But I think that is a task for all of us to at least poke at.
Well,
Yeah.
I tried your test case, Josh, and it works for me.
Well, yeah. You and I are both using full FHIR engines in that context. The thing that is harder to do, that I need to play with and other people do as well, is the SQL generation over the unions.
Right. That's why I hadn't said much.
Yeah, I don't know, the list of folks who are actually attempting to do that. So I think that's the open question here, is who's taking on SQL generation. I know that, obviously something that we've talked about sort of in the far, more into the future, but other than you, Josh.
Yeah, I would love to
terms of
spend
that.
some time with Josh. We will probably schedule the session so we can, then we can discuss what SQL generation techniques we are using. So, yeah, we can do this in this library, in this POC implementation.
Mhm.
And we can try to implement in our engine as well. But again, so I don't think it for Postgres it is a real big issue. But yeah, but at least to
Yeah.
think about syntax like dedicated.
I'm happy to join that too. I've done some of the FHIR path to SQL generation and mostly using joins and subqueries, which is a little different than the CTE approach, although it's all, it's all the same structures in different places. So yeah, I'd be interested in thinking through kind of, what some kind of database agnostic-ish structures might be that could work even in databases that are using a full schema rather than just storing JSON, or don't have a full JSON path implementation with like wildcards and other stuff. Or I guess not wildcard and JSON path repeating.
What are you guys doing? Are y'all trying to parse it out in like an expression tree or something that then gets pieced together? Is SQL statements that are unioned and intersected and ORed and things like that, or is it something different than that?
Sorry, can you clarify, Greg?
Well, like I've written a FHIR server implementation that had to parse search parameters out or search queries, and basically that's a lot simpler because you've got pretty much just ands and ors and things that you have to deal with, and so you can break the search string out into an expression tree, with each part, and those parts are either ands or ors, which can correspond to intersects or union SQL statements together. At least that's one way to do it, but I'm not picturing what you guys are doing for the SQL generation in this case. It seems like it's a lot more complex, a lot more open-ended than just simple ands and ors.
Yeah, I put an example in the chat. Not that this is a pristine or great example for others to emulate, but just so you can see what I'm talking about. This is the sort of thing that I'm generating right now. It starts with a table expression that pulls data out of the resources, and then it follows up with additional table expressions to walk down the trees of data in those resources and filter them as it goes.
In general, what we are doing, for example, so yeah, we have a view definition, there is a FHIR path expressions. So we're parsing FHIR path expression into IST, which belongs to FHIR path. And then essentially you're doing what's called like transpilation. Yeah. So you're trying to transform your IST like view definition plus FHIR path into SQL IST. And so we're doing this in like trying to do it in a one iteration, but there's some rewrite rules we should apply, like we just call it sometimes super compilation, stuff like this. I've tried to find like theory how to do this. I didn't find it. But in general, yes, you're transforming one IST into another IST in one pass, or maybe two pass or three passes. Like then you can do super compilation if you're transforming the same language into the same language, yes, doing some optimizations. And yeah, and that's what probably we can discuss with Josh, well, we have one more representation. We have like SQL IST. So you're building like data structure from data structure. And after that, you're dumping this into SQL. And Josh, at the last phase, you're starting like concatenating strings, yes?
At the very end, I'm concatenating strings, yes.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a very, very interesting discussion that people potentially outside this group would be interested in. I did want to ask the group, if anybody went back and looked at any of the literature on this, if there was any sort of compilation transpilation literature when it comes to potentially something similar pattern. But I don't know, Nikolai, if you took a look, there's something that crossed my mind is maybe somewhere in academia somebody has thought about this before and tried to implement it.
Yeah.
or had some insights into it. If that's not the case, I mean, I think it's still worth us taking a look and seeing, if anybody in academia in this world has thought about this, and maybe they'll have insights that could help us. But in terms of the next step, a meeting that's focused on SQL generation, I think sounds great. And I can help set that up, or get some potential times for folks to be able to join that, and then go from there. So, but I think that'll be a particularly interesting meeting for us. And then, hey, not that this is an academic group, but we could be breaking some new ground here. So worth documenting to see if there's anything that can be documented or published outside of that.
I'm wondering if we actually need to give implementations the flexibility to implement these things for a more constrained sort of use case. Like I can imagine if you just had tables and you were generating SQL to run over the tables, maybe you only want to allow the repeat function for questionnaire items, for example, because those are the only ones that you've actually exploded out into some other table. Or maybe it's just questionnaire items and, value set, because there's only a small number of these sort of repeating things within the spec anyway. And if you had a different type of implementation where you were actually building tables for these things, you would probably have some validation on the FHIR path, and you probably knock back requests perhaps that weren't on sort of paths that you support. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective.
But how would that simplify the implementation if you had to implement it, for that particular, resource type? You'd still need your implementation to be able to do it, right?
We may hard code all these cases like in the spec.
I mean, it's an even more narrow use case, right? Because it's not just nested questionnaire items. It's nested questionnaires of unknown depth, which means like it's not a questionnaire that you already know the structure of. And maybe there's another example that I'm not thinking of that's recursive that we would care about. I mean, I know there's recursive structures on like references and identifiers, but there again, like in the real world, in a lot of real world use cases, you can kind of cap that in your table. So I guess, like, I think John, to your point, like, I think there's a very narrow set of use cases potentially where we would want to be able to handle arbitrarily nested depths, as part of a view definition.
Like, I mean, to encounter structures, location structures, organization structures, where you got those part ofs or concepts with parent properties.
Right, they're a bit different though, because they're across resources. Within the resources, there's less, but they're still not narrow, because there's code system, value set, questionnaire, plan definition. The plan definition one is likely to be pretty core for a lot of users, just thinking about how people are using FHIR in real life. So Dan's right that there's not that many use cases, but they're not that narrow either, Dan.
All right, that's fair. I guess I'm thinking more about implementations. So if I'm building like an implementation that's going to run on USCDI, like, value, like I can constrain pretty tightly the items that could be recursive, and at my data layer, I may have to restrict those even further, and like on import cut off at 3 levels of recursion or something so that I can store it. So I guess,
I mean, the most likely thing is you'd have basically, even if you were doing what John said and pulling them out into tables, you look at that and go, well, I got to have questionnaire item level 1, questionnaire item level 2, questionnaire item level 3. It's just going to be, that would be a problematic design that you might fall into till you've figured out how much pain it's going to cause you. And then you'll end up with a recursive table structure, right? It's just the same problem again.
Yeah, but I guess I'm saying, like, even if it's recursive on the underlying structure, like my flattened views might not need all those levels of recursion. Like, so I guess like if I care about a certain set of kind of questions and question groups, you know, that could be like a somewhat defined level of item.
Could be, yeah.
I mean, you know, now that I'm following what you were discussing about that, I mean, I think it's really about incrementalism, right? And giving implementation sort of choices, you know, potentially, or implementers choices to define the level of nesting in advance, and then having an implementation that can match that that level of recursion, right? And so like there's kind of the completely abstract form that we're talking about now, but I think what that range of options is in advance of that, I think, you know, that should be, I think, an item to discuss, right? Like a topical item. That's the sense that I'm getting. Anybody agree, disagree with that characterization? Or at least like
Yeah.
summary of that of the discussion.
I mean, I think the point we've ended up is more research is needed around SQL generation, and then we can come back to the question of whether we want to allow unrestricted or restricted use of union, or whether we want to go with the other idea, which is the parameters on repeat, which no one said couldn't be done. Sure, I think we are.
Was that the two? Was those are two options that we had before? Because I don't have them down. Restricted or restricted use of union as number one.
Yeah, the third. Well, there's four options that we've talked about. One is to just allow the full syntax. The other is to allow to modify a repeat. Then we could just say, well, we'll just do it with the union structure and just suck up the fact that you'll be copying and pasting your column definitions. And then the fourth option is to introduce a specific structure for unioning FHIR path statements. There's plenty of options to choose from. Like one thing we could do that would be really light within the view definition is to say that path at the moment is 1-to-1. So you make path 1 to star and say that those path statements are unioned in the code in the runner rather than in the FHIR path.
I think maybe we should close off this agenda item. I think like we have some next steps here in terms of a SQL generation focused meeting and then fleshing out, getting our hands dirty and experimenting with some of the implementations so we can learn more about the potential for these different options. Is everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. That was recursion. The next one was actually we can talk about intent statements. There was a proposal out for statements around intent, which is, I think, potentially a little bit related to this.
So there's a thread on the Julep called FHIR path restrictions.
Yeah,
we were discussing that. Yep. And I did some analysis and proposed 3 levels of intent statement for a view for a runner, which nobody disagreed on. I was looking at that yesterday thinking, unless somebody jumps up and down about this in this meeting, I'll turn that into a PR on view definition.
Yeah, can everybody take a look? I posted in the chat. You can look at sort of most of the way down. Graham proposed 3 levels here. I'll just read them out. The first one, restricted to features that are labeled as must support. Second one, all features of FHIR path except for resolve, and then the third being all features of FHIR path including resolve. So I don't know if anybody has sort of initial reactions to that. If not, I think maybe the next step there is to do a PR, but let's take a moment to see if anybody has any sort of quick reactions to those leveling.
I wonder if these levels are going to be the specific things that people care about in general, or whether we're going to have to keep tweaking them. Like an alternative might be to say all features in FHIR path except, and then just provide a list of the things you're not intending to use. It's similar to the two examples here where you take away resolve from the list.
I mean, the problem for me with that approach is that if you say that, so the label features labeled as must support, by exclusion, that's a really long list of things you're excluding. And also, I mean, resolve is a special case because of atomicity issues. But there's certainly a big gap between restricted to the features labeled as must support and all features. I agree with that.
I'd be sort of interested in the other features that reach outside of itself. So just like resolve walks out into other resources, the terminology stuff that walks into the terminology service to say member of and any of those other varieties.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't think about them, and that's a good point.
Yeah, I put them in the same bucket with resolve. And there's two kinds of resolve, being the ones that really do it and the others that are suitable for search parameters, which just care about, oh, it was a patient with that ID. That's all I actually need to care about. I don't need to really resolve it.
Yeah, that's a search thing rather than like I did think about that. I couldn't see how it was relevant.
Well, if all you care is it actually one of those? Because a lot of them do go by type. So not necessarily walking to get to the rest, but just making sure it is something.
Yeah, true, false, or whether there is a reference resolution, I guess, yeah.
Did you have a particular use case in mind for resolve?
Yeah, I do. A very particular use case. So I'll talk about that for a couple of minutes. When I talk to implementers, one of the things that implementers are challenged by is that their atomicity model, their reference model, is defined by FHIR. But very often for a particular piece of application functionality, this is for application developers. For instance, it's a really common thing in a clinical app to present users with a list of things they might consider doing right now. And everybody's got their own list, defining their own role in the organization, a nurse or a radiologist or a radiographer. And those lists are displayed constantly. They need to refresh really quickly, and they will be displayed on every screen. So you might have hundreds of clients displaying those lists, keeping them current, and actually generating that list might cross 100,000 resources in a real clinical system. It's really, really difficult to make that work. And what you really need to do is to tell the server what particular cross-resource joins it should pre-optimize for. And the view definition is really suitable for that, to say, here's a constructed view across a set of resources that I am going to hit constantly, so index this. That is my use case for view definition with resolve in it.
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking out loud whether the resolve function embedded within FHIR path is actually the way to do this, or if there's another way of sort of expressing that. I think it does get a little bit complicated, having arbitrary. Sorry, what was that?
It certainly gets extremely complicated. You actually got to track all the keys that you crossed in doing your resolves, and then regenerate whenever those keys, anything in that key set, change. So it's a complicated thing to do. But what I'm looking for is a way for a client to inform the server in an interoperable way what optimizations a server should make to make those queries that they're going to do repeatedly simpler and quicker. And view definition is all of what you need to do that, except for the resolve part.
Isn't that just the join between two different tables?
This may be it consider it like a join, yes, but I think it's more like pattern of data access, so that the client can communicate intention that I'm gonna ask these guys this together, like encounter plus practitioner plus session. And if you can optimize, please do this.
Well, yeah,
But that
you're
is
going
what
to join and you're going to join across them in a particular way. You're going to pre-generate calculated things to index on. There's a bunch of things you might want to do, and some really simple use cases like present to me a list of all the patients without a care plan that's current. It's a really difficult query to specify in search. And that's where you get the calculated fields. So view definition can do all of those things if it has resolve. It's certainly not I mean, I support resolve in my implementation as well, because I'm just, I got a set of resources and generating tables from it. So there's various uses for that as well.
What happens when, because can't resolve only go one way, like you really need to navigate to a reference and then resolve it. What happens if you want to express links the other way, so where there's references in another resource that are pointing back to the subject resource?
That's a really interesting question that I do not have an answer for.
Because that would be where join would actually satisfy that need.
Yeah, that's true.
And resolve is just join. It's got to specify this is the key. But if you're doing those sort of joins, you know what that is anyway. And you're, as the view definition, you're saying, what is that link? I mean, a parser could actually check, yeah, those are valid references, and maybe there's a shortcut, which is what resolve is. But to me, it's still a join.
It's not for me, but in a database situation, it probably is.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my use case for resolve, John.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting use case that haven't really considered too deeply. Using view definitions to optimize for clients to tell servers to what to optimize across resources. I think that would be something interesting to potentially write up a little bit.
I know that the path link support like resolve. I don't know, John, can you give your use cases for resolve?
So yeah, we actually went down the track of allowing arbitrary resolution to other resources, and we actually implemented a reverse resolve function to support to address the problem of being able to go the other way. But I'm not sure that having implemented that and also having implemented this and sort of tried to harmonize the two, I'm not sure that is the way to go. I feel like we need something a little bit more generic outside of the FHIR path. This is just my current feeling. And maybe it involves, expressive, some sort of abstract join or referring to other view definitions. I'm not sure, but I think it needs a bit more thought, and I think it's a good idea and a valid use case. I just haven't got far enough in my thinking to know exactly how it would work yet.
Mm-hmm. Are we getting to SQL view? Yes, which can join two tables or two views, which can be is a kind of query or SQL view in ANSYS. with all these joins, yes. And then
Yeah,
once can be expressed with, let's say, two views, like SQL on FHIR views and one like database view on top of these two views.
One option, thinking about what John said, one option is to define an additional, like another function for SQL on FHIR, like join instead, that has more limited semantics
Mm-hmm.
and additional meaning. But anyway, we shouldn't
Mhm.
get stuck on this and come back to this.
Yep.
Yeah, certainly. I think that this idea of cross view definitions and abstract joins, things like something that we should put some effort into fleshing out, or at least something to think about specifically on paper. I don't know, John, if I can volunteer you to start thinking about that, or at least putting down some thoughts and ideas.
Sure.
Right, sounds good. And then I think that will help inform the conversation around enums in some ways, but I think we can table that conversation for now, unless anyone disagrees. Next up on the agenda is contained elements. We had some outstanding tasks there. One was for Ryan to look at contained resource targeting and also around get container key. So Ryan, any updates on that?
Yeah, not unfortunately, I wasn't really able to get to this one, but yeah, let me write up some notes and post it to the chat, and we can at least as a reference point, and we can bring it up the following meeting. But yeah, this other items kind of came up this week, so wasn't able to spend too much time in this space.
All right, no problem. I wanted to just check in on that. The other item that I had next on the list was from Dan about the where syntax or the where structure, about moving that to the top of the hierarchy. I don't have a lot of background on that one, but maybe for the group, just to refresh our memories and on what you're thinking about there.
Yeah, I'll drop a link in the chat to the example. I don't know feel strongly or like have a particular use case in mind. I think this was in response to a use case that Graham brought up where you might want to use union to create a couple different branches that have different criteria. It seems we moved a lot of items from kind of the root level into the select level, but we didn't move where. So you have this situation where you can use the where keyword at the root level, but when you want to do a where in a branch of like a union all operation, then you have to somehow shove the where into for each clause or into your path. And so that's, if we think where is useful as a way to, as like, kind of semantic sugar and kind of a way to break that out very clearly, it might be worth being able to use that at other levels of the hierarchy as well, particularly for unions.
Any thoughts or reactions from the group?
I think as long as it's just syntactic sugar, and I guess you'd be thinking about an array of where clauses similar to what happens at the root. Like if it was okay to just join those together with a dot and stick them onto the for each, and it meant exactly the same thing, I think that's fair game. If we start introducing subtle differences in the semantics, I would worry more.
Yeah, at least in my conception, it would follow that same logic.
And I'm still curious. So if we have like array of where, does it mean or and? So because before it was and, yes.
Yeah,
it's still and.
It's still and. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we're saying we would join them all together with dot where such and such, dot where such and such, and they chain that way.
As well, I do comment it because I see in some cases people really want case statement, not union. Yes, I understand that you can simulate like case statement as a union with a way criteria, but maybe it worth to consider like introducing explicit like case or if statement. So at least it will communicate intention better than just doing this through the union, because you understand that in case of case there only one branch which is working. Yes, in case of union you may have like multiple results.
Just wanted to rest on the where clause again, but then we can talk about, I think, case statements or if statements. What's the next step in thinking about moving the where clause or allowing to move? I think we just have some examples right now. Is that true, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, and Josh touched on this too, like, is there any downside of moving where under select? I guess to me, it's hard to explain why we have a where clause at the root and nowhere else if it's useful in making view definitions readable. So I guess I could see an argument for removing where entirely, which I don't necessarily agree with. And I can see an argument for allowing it in the places where you might use a where where as part of your function, as part of your FHIR path. But I guess to me, I guess I don't see the reason to have it, but not to allow it in some places.
So for sort of an artificial restriction. But go ahead, Graham.
It seems to me that it makes sense how it is, because the where at the root level applies to all the sub-selects, and then what you select in the path applies to your sub-selects. And so it makes sense to me that it is sort of like a level up, so that you can share a where across all your selects. If you pushed it down one, then you'd have to just repeat the same where all the time.
But we have a root level select now.
Right, and the where applies to all the where applies to all the root level selects. And then when you go into each of those selects, it's got a path which selects a set of stuff that applies to the nested selects.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually works a level down.
So you're saying you'd need one more level of nesting if you wanted to have a where at the root select that applied to nested selects. You just have to also nest your select under that.
I'm saying that if you took where out of the root, then you'd have to repeat this implied select. You'd have to repeat the where part at each of the selects, which should be a downside for sure. But down in the individual selects, you can have, as you said, the where in the path, and splitting it out. As Josh said, it's just syntactic sugar. Then is it going to be easier to parse or easier to make efficient? I didn't pick up any reason why we would think that. And from my use case, like the thing that was where a nested where like this wasn't necessary for my use case. My use case was having more flexibility than a union statement, but I think we can live with a union statement for my use case, and the where is neither here nor there semantically, I think.
Yeah, I think I could. I mean, I could be convinced like either way or in this perspective. Yeah, I mean, the reasoning why, like at least initially, I kind of had it only put at the root is like one, there is. I mean, yeah. I mean, throughout all variations, like we haven't really had a root select. I mean, we have root selects plural, and so to Graham's point, like we want. I mean, yeah, it seems like having a where at the root, and that would apply to all those makes sense. So I think we definitely want to keep it at the root unless we want to additionally change some, have a more significant structural change. And then I hadn't put it in like the nested select operations because I mean, like in a given select, I mean, structure underneath there, like, I mean, you can put it like in the for each, and like having a where clause and a select without a for each, like I'm not sure exactly what the semantics of that are. And so yes, I don't know. I think I'm open to it, but like the interplay between where and for each and the criteria there is a little bit hazy to me, and so I kind of held off on it. But if there's like a sort of a concrete mechanism that has well-defined semantics that doesn't sort of paint us into weird edge cases when we kind of think about the interplay between like the where and the for each and the unions and all that sort of thing, I think it seems worth considering to me, but it's not a path I could gone down so far in the early stretches, because like the interplay between those things wasn't obvious, and for the vast majority of cases, I think that having a where within the for each itself, uses an existing mechanism that gets you what you want for almost all cases, and so it's kind of where it was there. But if there's well-defined semantics, then we find it useful, then I'm open to it.
Well, there's one thing you could do. You might think this is good or bad, but if you split the select path into path and select and where, then you could pass a bigger result set to the sub-selects than you generated entries for in the path statement. You might think that's good or bad, but that would be one definite potential advantage of splitting the where out of the path.
What do we think are the next steps here?
Well, given
Sorry.
that we're on time, on the hour, I'll knock up a case that illustrates how you might use a split where in that way and put it in short.
Anyone else in terms of next steps around the where discussion? I think that's a good next step, but and then we can focus the conversation around that. But any others?
Yeah, I can write up a list of some of the trade-offs we've discussed for the next meeting as well, because I certainly get your point, Graham, that either you have to nest your selects under a root select, or you have to repeat your where, and so that's certainly a downside unless we also put it at the top level. So I think I can kind of outline some of those, and we can look at pros and cons and use cases.
Sounds good. So we didn't get to OMOP and chatting about SQL generation experience currently. We'll parking lot those for the next meeting, and good to see all of you. And I think we can call it a day.